morning, everyone. So everyone has been talking about the out of school children initiative, and in abbreviation we usually use the word OOSCI. So, but today we have been the initiative has been introduced many times. But let me. So from the video that we saw, we can understand how data are important. And it is not only to find the numbers of out-of-school children. It is mostly, the most important thing is to find their characteristics. And it's the out-of-school children, it's complex problems, and it's in terms of inequalities and the multiple disparities that they are facing. So the initiative, the OOSCI initiative, was launched in 2010, and as mentioned, it is a partnership between UNICEF and UIS. The goal is to make a substantial and sustainable reduction in the number of children out of school. So primarily, the goal in 2010 was this EFA Goal 2, or the MDGs Goal 2, where it's primary education, universal primary education, or UPE. So this is why we joined forces, and today, with the SDG 4 covering education, it is still relevant. So today the goal would be to enable all children to complete at least 1 year of pre-primary and complete primary and lower secondary education, and this covers target 1 and 2 of the SDG number 4. So a lot of speakers before me have introduced already a lot of data. So I don't want to take too much of your time this morning again. We saw this chart a few times already. So it points out that there is 50.2 million children in primary education and 65 million in lower secondary, for a total of 124. If you recall in the video, it says 58,000. So this video is a bit old. It was done 2 years ago. So we can see that many of the speakers before me said, we can see that from 2007, the number of out of school did not decrease. It has stagnated. But the reality is that now there have been an increase of 2.4 million children from 2010 to 2013. So this is the important fact that this shows. This is only for primary education for the Asia and Pacific. So this region accounts for 29% of the world's out-of-school children in primary. And there is, in this region, 1.2 million more children since 2010. And from the chart, I don't know if you can see all, but this increase is due to the male in South and West Asia. So by breaking down the information on who are the out-of-school children, we can really tackle who are those children. In day one, I know that one of the speakers also presented this PowerPoint, this slide graphic. This is just to let you know, it is very important to look at both the numbers again, but also the proportion. And in some of the country, even if the number of out of school is very small, in the proportion out of the population eligible to be in school is very high. And some of in the blue one, there is a few Pacific islands where their population is very small, so the number of out of school is very small, but in relative proportion, it reached almost 20% of the population of primary age is out of school in those small islands. So, so this is a mango tree, and usually we go for the low-hanging fruits. And what we want to do with this OOSCI is to go and reach those who are the most marginalized, or those who are the unreached. So if we have business as usual, well, we will have a lot of difficulty to reach those who are up. So we want to know which are those children. To do that, so as mentioned, UNICEF and UIS, with the initiative, we proposed a new approach. And this approach is in 3 main stages. So one is developing comprehensive profiles of excluded children using consistent and innovative statistical methods. So this first stage is linked with comprehensive profiles by asking ourselves who are the children out of school and where they are. The second stage is linking those profiles to the barriers and bottlenecks that lead to exclusion. So in that stage, we ask, why are they out of school? And we look into the barriers. The third stage is identifying, promoting, and implementing sound policies, or maybe I can, sorry, it's really, sound policies that address exclusion from the multi-sectoral perspective. Sorry, it's really not easy to read here. So we are looking into how they can be brought to school and stay there. So we look into the policies, and they have to be targeted policies based on the profiles. So how to identify the different groups of out-of-school children and children at risk? In 2010, we had the CMF, the Conceptual Methodological Framework. And in this framework, we had the clear definition of what is out-of-school children. And we had, in 2015, we have now the operational manual. So this is an improved guideline. It's a step-by-step document to support the countries to conduct their national OOSCI study. So the out-of-school children are usually defined by 5 dimensions of exclusion. We have the out-of-school children, and they can be, we look into only 3 different levels of education: pre-primary, primary, and lower secondary. We then have dimension 4 and 5, who covers the children who are in school, but are at risk of dropping out. In dimension 2 and 3, we have also what we call the school exposure. The out-of-school children can have different school exposure. They can have been in school and dropped out. They can have the probability of enter before the age of 17, or they can have the probability of never enter school. And this was a new approach. This was never done before. And this helped us in knowing which group and how to target the different policies that we want to implement. So if we take the example here of at the sub-regional level, we will see that in East Asia and the Pacific, for example, my God, I don't see the numbers. There is 42. My slide, it's too small. There is 51 male and female students who are dropping out of primary school. So those are the out of school, the majority of the out of school in East Asia and the Pacific. So the targeted intervention here will be more to make sure that we retain the students in school. The case of the South and West Asia for female, there is 80% of female in South and West Asia that they will most probably never get in school. The policies will be quite different in this. Here it will be to maybe look into the alternative enrollment. So enrollment into alternative learning pathways. So this is where we want to stress. There is different school exposure. The out-of-school children have different characteristics based on their location, on the wealth quantiles, based on their gender. And so all of this have to be well documented, and based on the profiles, we can go into the barriers and then to the policy levels. And then I want to call my colleague, Camilla, to continue the presentation.
Good morning. I'll take over from Aurélie here. As Simrin said, this also reflects our partnership in the sense of the part of the initiative that we each provide support for. I found this picture because I thought we should have something else but numbers and graphs. And I'm going to talk a little bit about placing the child in time and space. This is of course a bit abstract, but talking about the barriers and the policies, talking about the environment in the sense of what are the social, what are the political, what are the economical, and what are the cultural circumstances that this child is living in. So we're looking at all the things that the child is a part of. When we have the data, as Aurélie showed you already, we can see with the data that there are certain trends, or there is a certain flow of children. Imagine if you have sort of a long rope, and sometimes that rope expands and sometimes it narrows, and that can show you some path that can give you indications of where to look. So when we know who these children are, as Aurélie already talked about, then we need to look at the barriers. And these bottlenecks are helping us finding these barriers. So looking for the barriers is an exercise where we look at the data, but we can't get the information of why from the data, but we can get indications for where to look for these barriers. When we do that, we also have to consider what has already been done and what are the existing policies. In most cases, there are actually quite elaborate policies and quite thorough policies with all very good intentions. So it's often not necessarily a matter of new policies, but it's a matter of recommendations to improve on these policies. Then, as I think everybody knows, there are always limitations, and that is also part of this exercise, to see what we don't have and to look at what we don't know, and also to look at sort of the gaps within the existing monitoring system. These two things are a quite crucial part of OOSCI, and it's sort of, when we do this exercise, this is the first obstacle, and it's a big obstacle. But it's also why we do it. So I think the lessons learned in many of our countries is that just the first sort of initial exercises to do OOSCI is already teaching us a lot. Now, I made this figure to sort of show you a little bit of the process. I'm not going to go into details about it because we have our country panel who will actually give you concrete examples. But I wanted to point out that there is a process, there is a method to sort of navigate in this very complex landscape. And we use certain categories, and we use certain tools, and we use certain approaches to sort of walk through this landscape. I'm just going to sort of give you very brief examples of how these different categories could look like. So the first one is we're looking at the profiles or the dimension and the degree of exposure. So for example, we have pre-primary children who are not in pre-primary school. Then we look at the characteristics, which would be, for example, living in urban industrialized zones, low household income, girls, migrant children. Then we move on to look at the bottlenecks. And as I said, these are indicators. So for example, when we can see there is late enrollment in grade 1, this could also be a matter of that children are not ready or they're not perceived to be ready, which feeds back to the pre-primary. Then of course there's the barriers, which could be many things. Could be restrictive administrative regulations, or simply pre-primary is not mandatory. lack of schools, lack of learning spaces, no mother tongue instruction. And then we look at the existing policies. As I said, they're there. So it's very important to recognize what already sort of is in place. And then we look at the efficiency. So maybe the Education Act doesn't include pre-primary, maybe it does, but it's not applied, or it's not communicated, or it's not offered in sort of certain remote communities. It could also be that, for example, if we look at pre-primary, there's no feeding programs, so the school feeding program or school lunch program has to be extended to pre-primary. So there's a lot of things that sort of can be considered within the existing framework. And then, of course, there's the recommendations around the findings, which is multiple and, of course, reflects some of the, when you're looking at the efficiency. So I don't want to go into detail that. We will also hear from our country panels about that. So just to say that, it's not about getting as much data as you can and just store it somewhere, because that's all we need. There is a lot of data out there, and that's sort of the first experience we have when we go and look. The challenge is to combine it and to share it and to sort of disaggregate it. So it's both related to sharing sort of in a horizontal level between ministries and departments, but it's also a challenge of sharing at a vertical level, in the sense of between the system level and communities, for example, because there's a lot of information within the communities that doesn't reach the system level. So, this is just to say that sometimes when we talk about OOSCI, it's perceived as a study. So you just need to do the analysis and then the job is done. That is not the case. Once the analysis is done, then the job starts. So while it's a complex process to do the analysis itself is just part of this process, and reflecting on the existing systems that are in place and getting the most out of it, and then having some recommendations where you start working. We also try to have a strong governance structure around the project, because one thing that we have learned is buy-in is extremely important, and it's buy-in at all levels. It's both at high level, but it's also down to community levels, because we need support and we need collaboration. So of course this is sort of an ideal scenario, and it never looks like this. But this is sort of the format that we come with and we recommend. We recommend to have steering committees in place, because one of the challenges once we've done the study that we've seen in many countries are it won't get endorsed, because we're dealing with a very sensitive subject, as I think all of you already know. It's also cross-sectoral. So even though we have a Ministry of Education that are positive, then it might expand to other areas, and we haven't worked with these areas before, and then we have some conclusion that impacts on them, and suddenly we risk being in a situation where we don't get the final endorsement. So taking on this project sort of requires a lot of pre-work and ongoing work. The last one I want to talk about is a little bit is some of the key policy implications. I think my time is up, sort of, so I will do this quickly. But it's just to say that doing the OOSCI study is also having sort of key policy implication, in the sense it's underlining the importance of the life cycle approach, because it looks at both primary, pre-primary, primary, and lower secondary. And it does an analysis that goes through that whole sort of period. It's also drawing attention to the patterns and forms of exposure to schooling. For example, early school leavers, children who will enter late, children who are unlikely to ever enter, as we heard from Aurélie. And of course, providing better understanding of the multiple and overlapping forms of exclusion and barriers. This is a key point, because even though we address one barrier, there might be 3 more barriers, and then we don't see a change. And then, of course, identifying at-risk group, which I think also is very important to keep in mind. We're not just looking at what you call sort of the damage done, we're looking at prevention. So how do we address children who are at risk, and how do we ensure that they actually stay in school? And then, of course, a more sophisticated analysis of learning and completion. There's quite a few countries engaged in Asia Pacific, so we're quite happy, it's going well. It's a challenge, but we like it. And many of these countries are sort of starting up, so we're also sort of looking forward to see more results coming out of the study. The last one I want to touch upon very quickly is some of the noteworthy results that we have. For example, improvements in data management and monitoring system. This could be the simple acts of aligning the school year or the cycle of collecting data with the school year, because that has impacts on the numbers that you get out when you do the analysis. It has also helped to improve inter-sectoral cooperation and partnership through strengthened understanding of linkages between the education sector and other sectors. So again, the need for collaboration and actually having some sort of structure in place that enforces that. For example, the steering committee would have members from planning, from Ministry of Labor, so we would emphasize the sort of a very strong cross-sectoral collaboration. And then, of course, the incentive to actually address these bottlenecks and barriers to education development. Thank you very much.